So I am pleased to be joined in studio by Corey and Andy Pate of the Party of Choice. And I had reached out to you guys to talk about this. Of course, we have a regular segment on Thursdays with the two of you. But I wanted specifically to address Islam and Islamism and how do you have that conversation with the left? Because I've been noticing some interesting things coming out of the left. Have you guys?
What have you been hearing?
Well, I'm hearing... The main thing that continues to strike me is that is this tagging of Islam as simply a religion, and I don't believe that it is. I very much don't believe that it is. I really believe that it is a neo-political ideology. Said that in the last hour. Said that a lot, which was a mouthful for me to get out the very first time I said it, and it gets easier and easier every time. I'm kind of afraid, and I'm sure that we'll get into the messaging aspect of this, that when I use those words, I sound like a tinfoil hat-wearing, right-wing nut job.
Actually, you sound dead on.
Really? Okay.
Which means you're a tinfoil hat-wearing, right-wing nut job.
Which is a good point. But, that's the thing that I keep hearing is, it's just a religion. All religions need to get along, that kind of thing. And so... That's my first question for you.
Well, actually, I always tell people this who, because I'm a born-again Christian, and I have a lot of people say, well, look at all the wars and everything over religion and all the dying that's been done over religion. And I always look at them and I say, no, religion's always the excuse. The wars are over land.
That's a great
The wars
point.
are over resources. Religion is something you use to motivate some of the masses. Okay, it's something you use to validate that it is always over resources and land. That's it.
Okay.
Oh, well, not always, but almost always. Okay.
Well, and I think that is true. Do you believe that that's our current state with ISIS and the Islamists and that kind of thing? I mean, this doesn't seem to be a land grab. This is trying to subjugate the rest of the planet.
Right. Well, the thing is that. And we're going to talk about this in a bit. The big thing about, have you ever noticed that the left de-emphasizes the Islamic threat constantly?
Of course.
There's a big reason they do that. And that is, at their core, they share something. They're very sympathetic to it. The left is not jihadists. They're not going to go out killing people. But they share one big thing in common, and that is the desire to control their fellow man.
That's a great point.
Okay. And while this is not all about land, it is about land, but more importantly, the people on the land. And that's the difference between the jihadist threat, I would say, and a lot of the other threats we face, the Soviets at times and the Nazis and so forth. They were taking land. These guys want to subjugate everybody on the land worldwide and basically say, believe or die, convert or die.
Right.
And so the people on the land are very important to them, too.
It makes sense. And as you're talking, I'm thinking through kind of what the difference is between the medieval, crusades or whatever, wars that were fought in the past and what we've got going on now. Our economies have changed. Is the biggest thing. And I don't know that I ever made this connection before right now, so let me try this out here live on air. That's always fun.
You are being taped.
I am being taped. That's that too. But our economies have changed. It used to be that the land was the resource. The land was the thing that provided all of the wealth, and the people were sort of secondary to that. That's not the case anymore. Now, I mean, we're in a information economy, or some argue a post-information economy. But people are the resource. People are how wealth is created. We see this like in Atlas Shrugged. We see, that same type of thing happening. So. Maybe that's part of it as well. I mean, maybe it does get back to economics. It's just a different way of pursuing it.
In a way, I guess what it basically is war is about taking territory.
Right.
But territory used to be land, and now it's expanded beyond that.
Okay.
But once again, I would say I agree with what you're saying. Islam is more than a religion, or it's not just a religion, or maybe not a religion. It's exactly what you said. And it's a political event that they're trying to seize, take control of other people, and brand it with religion.
Yeah. Well, so we got the left trying to minimize the Islamic threat. How do we have that conversation? I mean, this is why we have you guys in, so we can actually have those conversations with other people who don't maybe totally agree with us. They're trying to minimize it. How do you point that out without looking like you need to invest in tinfoil?
Well, one thing I've been doing is just reading up on the whole history of Islam, because I think it's important to understand where it's coming from and what it is and what their goals are. Because the biggest thing I remember hearing after 9/11 is, well, no, Islam is a religion of peace. It's a religion of peace. There's crazy people out there, but the average person who's practicing, it's all about peace. And these people just went off the reservation. Well, I don't know. After the last 13 years, I don't really believe that anymore. And I was reading a book by Geert Wilders. He's a Dutch parliamentarian who has spoken out against Islam in the Netherlands, and he's actually risked his life to do so and lives under armed guard now. But one of the biggest things I learned from his book was that Islam, they say that it means peace, but the other word that means peace is submission. It's the same word. And so really the only way you can have peace is through submission.
That's a good...
Think about that for a minute.
Good point. And of course, the meaning of the word Islam itself is submission.
Yes.
That's the meaning of that word. So, okay, well, that makes sense now. I had never put all those pieces together. All right, so we've got these facts, and can you say that to a lefty and have them agree with you? I mean, how do you approach this conversation?
Well,
how do you break down that wall?
Let me say something very harsh.
Okay.
Okay, not in a way to reach the left, but something very harsh about the left. And for those who don't know, I am a former member. I was raised by the academic left. The greatest way to fight radical Islam is to defeat Democrats in elections.
Okay.
Okay. And I know how awful that sounds because there's a lot of good Democrats but the current crop of Democratic leadership, you can't defeat radical Islam with leaders who are sympathetic to it, period. And they share that desire for control, not the desire to kill people and stuff like this. But this is why you constantly find the current leadership. They always come down on Israel, up on the air. They always try to look away. And, if you want to see the results of liberal leadership facing Islam, look at Europe.
Good point.
Okay. When you do not take radical Islam and see it for what it is, or when you sympathize with the desire to control others, and you see this sweeping in, and the first thing it does is attack your enemies, right? Islam, the thing it hates first is what? Jews and Christians,
right? Which
are generally hated by, and we talked before on how the left basically doesn't like Christianity, and the reason is because Christianity is formed on choice, reward, consequence. You make your choices and you bear your rewards or consequences from those choices.
Right.
The left always seeks to lower the rewards of good decisions, lower the consequences of bad decisions, or remove choices altogether. Okay, liberalism is an assault on that system, and guess what? So is Islam. and because they have that in common, it's incredible. That's why we see, feminists and
which
Islam
blows my mind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why they make the strangest bedfellows, because when you hate the same person, it's
right.
very easy to work together. When you are united around controlling others, making them live like you, oh my goodness, the lengths you will go to.
Well, that's a great point. That is a great point. The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right.
Yeah. So I go over, just before we go to break here, go over that choice, reward, consequence thing. You
mean where it comes
that.
from?
You blew through that pretty quick. Well, let's explain the concept. Let's
okay,
explore
real
that
quick.
A bit.
It comes from the Garden of Eden. And here you have all these trees there, and God tells the and by the way, folks, whether you're a Christian like me or an atheist conservative, you can still get the point. It still means the same. But here, God looks at Adam and Eve and basically says, freely you may eat from any tree in the garden. He doesn't say you got to eat from tree number 8 in row H, branch 12, piece of fruit number 4.
Right.
He says, freely you may eat, but that your choices may have consequence, that they may have purpose, that you may have purpose. I'm going to put 2 trees in the middle.
Okay.
One of great reward, one of great consequence. And that set up the system for the entire scriptures. Choice, reward, consequence. We see it in the biblical God came and immediately granted choice and even gave us the vehicle to disobey him.
Right.
All right. And then you see Jesus and the apostles, they never, ever, it holds true throughout the whole scriptures. Jesus and the apostles never tried to make non-Christians live like Christians. There was no Christian jihad. There was no believe or die. There was no, choice was elevated. Jesus sold with choice, not against choice.
Right.
And today people in America really don't understand that. And sometimes that's our fault. Fault of people like me.
Well,
we mean well.
We do mean well, but it's a much better way to spread that kind of morality, and to persuade others is a much better way. Welcome back to Grassroots Radio Colorado. This is Chris Cook, and I am in studio with Corey and Andy Pate of the Party of Choice. We're talking about Islam, and we're talking about radical Islam. Whether you differentiate that or not, I'm kind of at the point where I'm no longer differentiating the two. I mean, Corey, you've been doing some reading on this.
That's the point I'm to as well, because the more I read and the more I have discovered about the history of where it came from and where it's gone, it's a lot more to it than what you hear on the news. And one of the things that you'd asked us was, what is one way that we can help tear down the wall with this issue?
Right.
And one thing that Andy explains quite well is that if you look at the countries that are founded on religions, look at what religion and faith base it starts with.
Yeah, if you look at countries, so many people here think Christianity is the big bad villain. Newsflash. Countries that are founded in Christianity, because it's a choice, reward, consequence system, have tremendous religious diversity. Have you noticed this?
That's true.
You've got tons of people with other beliefs. Now, if you look at countries that are founded in Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and so forth. By the way, Islam's the only one that kills you for not believing it. They're really different from the others.
Right.
But you'll see in those countries 95, 98% Taoist, 98% this, atheist Russia until recently. And you'll see overwhelming majority with one faith. In Western civilizations that were founded on Christianity, because it's choice, reward, consequence, what it means to be a Christian nation is you can freely choose what you're going to believe, Christian or not.
Right.
And you don't have to be afraid to do so. Nobody is going to hunt you down for doing it. That's what it means to be a Christian nation. It doesn't mean you be a Christian. It means it means it was founded that way, so you be what you wish. You choose. You have your own rewards, your own consequences, here and in the hereafter.
Amazing. Well, and you find that resonates? Do people go, oh, okay.
Yes. They're
That's
really
awesome.
Shocked.
Okay.
They don't expect it.
Good. Well, of course not. It's like when you finally get through to them and explain that corporations are not evil. They're providing you with that iPhone that you're holding, or that Mac that you're typing at Facebook at me with. But the left, I mean, they just cling to these ideas. How are they undermining? And we talked a little bit about this in the last segment. How are they undermining the war on terror?
Here's the biggest way, and I saw this immediately when they started doing this. Once again, I was raised by the left. I call it bust the perp.
Okay.
They reduce every terrorist action to, we got to bust the perp. And here's what I mean. In an effort to downplay the threat of radical Islam, the left has reframed it with bust the perp. Ignore the raging army against you and instead exhaust all your resources going after individuals as if each one is some deranged loner. Right. So, Osama bin Laden, we had to get him. Well, that's a good thing to do. I'm all for that. Let's get him.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And in his case, it was actually pretty meaningful. He's a figurehead. He was powerful. He had money. But what did it really accomplish? Not much, right? If you look at Major Hassan, Benghazi was incredible. That was a mob. Okay,
Yeah.
A mob, a well-organized mob attacking and killing. This was a total terrorist thing, lots of them. And what do we hear from the left? We're going to find the people who were responsible for this, and we are going to get them like they were a bunch of individual loners. Boston, we'll get those too.
Right.
Forget the people who were providing, supplementing, the network. Go ahead, I'm
well,
sorry.
no, you're fine.
Bust the perp.
Well, and going back to Benghazi, and
Yeah.
so then the perp became some guy who had made a film that at the time that I watched it, 32 people had seen, and that created the entire Arab Spring.
Yeah,
that created the entire problem in Benghazi. I don't think so, but so they even make up perps then to blame stuff on scapegoats, if you will.
Yeah, to make it understandable. For me anyway. Let me use a football example. I think in terms of football, I speak football. Think of Peyton Manning, and the Broncos this weekend are playing the Chiefs. And I want you to imagine that Peyton has just run a play. It's a timeout. He comes back to the huddle, and one of the players comes to him and says, "Hey, Peyton, I got good news for you." Okay, you know that Kansas City Chief, that Chief who just made that last tackle? Well, some of our best people are reviewing the footage, and we think we can identify him. Okay, now the pictures are kind of, Peyton, the pictures are kind of and Peyton's just sitting here with his mouth open like he's doing one of his commercials. Hey, now the pictures are kind of grainy, but if you look closely, you can just make out a number and a name on the back of this jersey. I want you to know we are going to bring him to justice.
That's good to know.
Now, Peyton's going to look at him and just say, you guys, I'm not fighting him. He is just taking orders. We're trying to defeat a whole team. I don't care about the individual.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. That's the point that they fail to get. I love that, though. We've got David from Denver on the line who has a question. David, what do you got for us?
Actually, just 3 quick comments responding to things that your excellent guests have said.
Okay.
First, in the idea that you see in Muslim countries, 99% population is Muslim. What that proves is, to me, is that atheists are total cowards. In all of those lands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Christians were put to death for refusing to renounce Christ. But
True.
Even though we know, statistically speaking, that there are a certain percentage of those populations that are atheists, that do not believe, they still salute to Muhammad because they know they would be killed.
Well, from their point, since there's not an almighty God to disown, they're not doing what Peter did 3 times, so there's no religious sin that they're committing. Are they being cowards or wise?
Well, I think we're seeing that we're going to suffer the same thing here because the liberals do not stand for anything, and they won't fight against Islam spreading in the West.
Right.
But the next point was on your idea that there's no choice in Islam. And this is, I think, a point that people miss. If you see Muslim women wearing a veil, and your instant thought in the West is that, they're so modest, like maybe a nun. But they're not. They could have a totally black heart, full of hate, and just be the most bitter, evil person, but they're still covered with the veil. They might not even be chaste sexually, but they are forced to wear the veil.
Well, basically, you're saying, whereas the nun chooses to be a nun in the convent,
right.
This was chosen for them. No, they may be very good, but you don't know what's behind the veil.
No, so you have no way of seeing them as the outsider to know if they really are a good or a bad person based upon that. It's just a meaningless prop that is forced upon them. And actually, I think all of Islam is that same way because none of them, you can never know if the Muslim you're dealing with or any of the hundreds of millions that they claim around the world truly do believe or not, because they can lie to you and they can't leave it or they'd be killed. So there's no way of genuinely knowing whether they are a believer or not.
That's a great point because you don't have that free will to make that choice to evidence what is in your heart.
But the last one is on the West. As far as how do you get to liberals on this topic, and Chris, you brought this up the other day. Everybody needs to just cry and weep. It's for the children. Boo-hoo, it's for the children. Well, the children who are born into Islam, even in the West, even in America, do not have freedom of religion. Their own mother would kill them if they rejected Muhammad. What more does anybody need to know about Islam?
Wow, I hadn't thought about that.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point.
Even though they're born in America and they supposedly have this right, they don't. Right. And all of us just stand by and say, well, it's the Muslims have the freedom to practice their religion. Islam would not exist today in the world if it was not for the Sharia law that forces it upon anyone born into it and anyone unfortunate enough to live around a majority of Muslims.
Well, and that dictates every aspect of your life from sunset to sunset. Thank you so much, David, for offering that. Those are some fantastic points. Don't you guys think? I mean, I hadn't thought about the free choice thing in terms of Sharia and how does that evidence that you're a good person at all?
It doesn't. Here's the thing, and I say this and I don't know all of Islam, but I will say this. The reason God gave us in Christianity the option to do evil is if you don't have the option to do evil, you cannot do good. Mm-hmm. If I say to do good, you have to do the dishes every day in this home, and then I have a remote control and I force you to do the dishes every day for a year, have you ever done good? You did not, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so any system, not just Islam, but any system that does not allow you to choose your destiny does not allow you to be good.
That's a fantastic point. So, all right. So busting the perp is their big thing. I mean, the left's big thing. That's how they go. They try to blame this on the individual.
Always.
But we've got to step back. We've got to look at it from a bigger context. That this is really it's a cultural thing. It's part of this ideology. It's trained into. It's built into the system. Is probably the best way for me to say that. Am I right?
Yeah.
So where are we going next?
Well, I would say our strategy with Bust the Perp, guys, take advantage of it. That's an embarrassing way to address Islamic terrorism. The left is embarrassing themselves, and we don't say anything. I go at them and I just say, look, what is this, Bust the Perp? Oh, you want to get the individual? You want to get those individuals at Benghazi who did this? Are you crazy? Look, don't get him, get them. Get those who support this. This is going to be a war. You're in a holy war, and it doesn't matter if you declare it or not. They did, all right? And I always tell young people, radical Islam is far, far worse than the Nazis were, and there are 5 reasons why. Probably don't have time.
No, go. Let's start, and I'll cut you off if I.
Because young people, they understand the Nazis,
right?
Okay, because they see all the shows, and I say, look, radical Islam's far worse. They cut off heads. They do terrible things too. But number one, they're scattered. It's not one isolated country. We can go in and get Germany. Okay. This is terrifying. They're everywhere. Number 2, they're incredibly well financed. The Germans were broke at the end. These guys are flush with oil money. Number 3, modern technology. Guys, the next time isn't going to be 9/11. They're going to put bioweapons in our water supply in 15 cities simultaneously.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, they can do so much worse. Number 4, religious zeal. The Nazis were largely atheists. They weren't driven by religious zeal. And number 5, here's the biggie. They're willing to die to kill you. That is incredible. That's the worst kind of villain.
That is the biggie.
Don't bust the perp. Get them.
Exactly.